Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Abby. I'm a consultant at Turner and Townsend, and we're joined today by Claire Brown, who is a senior consultant at Turner and Townsend and also PhD researcher at University of Manchester. So the purpose of today's event, this is a social housing retrofit accelerator or SHRA event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and delivered by Turner and Townsend.
Thank you so much, Abby, and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be looking at a complete beginner's guide to heating in social homes. We will be having a look at some of the different options and the motivations, thinking about some of the different options for heat emitters themselves, but appreciating that absolutely any project will need to have that full assessment to understand the building's scale and type before implementing any particular heat emitter type. So there might be other ones on the market that are available, excuse me, but for the purpose of today, we're looking at some of the more standard ones that we might commonly expect across our portfolios. So the agenda for today is we are really going to be having a look at the options that you might have, particularly in the context of a whole house retrofit, but also thinking about some of those options around particularly heating, some of the heating systems, controls, bringing into the thought process around that selection that we might be able to be having a look at. And then thinking about that maintenance at the end. So thinking about we've installed it, but actually how we're going to look after it so it's still going to be functional. When we consider the future of heating in UK buildings, what we've really got to think about is how is this going to be an important part of the climate change agenda? We're going to be thinking about it in terms of reducing CO2 from emissions. So by 2050, really reducing the amount of carbon that is associated from our heating in homes. This is taken from the Committee on Climate Change, and anyone I would advise to have a look at this in terms of the progress to date, but also helping facilitate that move forwards. Why this is really important? Heating is about making sure that we have that level of thermal comfort and warmth in our homes. Most of us will appreciate that heating demand is seasonal. So right at the moment, there might be some properties where heating has actually been switched back on to maintain that level of thermal comfort. But hopefully you can see in this graph that we have this seasonal variation. So in the summer months, we will see that we still have that hot water demand, but we won't have that space heating. And it's really important to note that actually this is an important consideration for our homes, is that we might not need to heat the space, but we will still need that hot water for washing our hands, for showering, for much more of those kind of health and well-being issues. Importantly, we also have the curve on here showing the solar yield. So that is the heat gain from the sun. Again, as an important heat source to consider when we are doing that whole house retrofit approach. So thinking about windows, thinking about recesses, thinking about solar panelling, for example. When we think about our tenants, our occupants, and people who live in our homes, these will come from a whole range of different priorities. Our vulnerable residents, their profile might look very different to this. So again, that being specific to other homes is really important to consider. So again, understanding your tenant, understanding the property, really important. When we are thinking about the actual kind of heating specification that we want, what we are trying to achieve is this level of thermal comfort for the occupants, for the activities that they are doing in the particular layout of that particular property. It is an important issue. It's one that we find importance for ourselves in our own homes, in whatever that might look like, but also in part of our work that we are addressing. There are a number of different heat emitters which can be utilised. This factor of deciding which is best will absolutely depend on the type, age, construction, and the occupants of the building. So again, that comes back to my earlier point about knowing the property, who is in that property and who needs to be kept warm when they need that heating. We have the influence of heat loss and heat gain in our properties. So again, that fabric first approach, that whole house retrofit philosophy, thinking about preventing that heat loss in winter, maximizing heat gain when we can as well during the winter months, so that we are utilizing essentially that free energy. Whichever heating system you do pick, it should absolutely be designed to make sure that you are going to be kept warm when you need it. In the UK, we have our heating season, and so it's about thinking how we design our homes to maximise that ability to maintain warmth at a particular stage. If you are interested in overheating, we have a recorded session from a couple of weeks ago that we did, so do make sure you go and have a look at that. For the purpose of this session, we're very much looking about the providing of heat to homes. What we do know is that the UK has some of the leakiest homes, so we're heating the space, we're heating the air, and then we are losing that as a result of leaks throughout the home. This could be through junctions around windows, around doors, not insulating the roof, and so addressing this thermal efficiency around the fabric is really important before we consider what heating options we should be putting in. More heating demand does put pressure on the system, so pulling energy from the grid if it is an electricity-based source, or even on the gas grid if it is a gas boiler at the moment, before those are rolled out. What we do need to think about is that system should truly reflect that heating demand in that property. It is a really important point to consider. And this is especially true when you think about who is in there. I've got 3 organisations up on the slide here in terms of what they are dictating in terms of the temperature that needs to be offered. So we've got the Energy Saving Trust, we've got the World Health Organization, and we've got Age UK. So all of them are discussing this very similar temperatures. Energy Saving Trust is looking at between 18 and 21 degrees in winter. World Health Organization, and importantly, their point is around 18 degrees for healthy and well-dressed people. So they're very much making that distinction around someone who is not vulnerable, someone who doesn't have underlying health issues. It's around making sure that it is someone who is healthy and has that ability to maintain heat as well. Age UK then suggests, so again, thinking about vulnerable tenants, older people should heat their living area to around 21 degrees, while the rest of the home at 18. Again, individuals will have different requirements. There might be specific medical needs that mean that these have to be higher or indeed lower. So again, use this as a guide, use these organisations as a way of spreading that information around what expectations are around that temperature. So when we think about temperatures, these are some common sources that we have at present. Okay, so moving forward, when we are thinking about a decarbonised heat perspective, we will be looking at different options. As we move towards different styles of buildings, as we look at whole scale retrofit, again, different options will be appropriate. So top left is kind of classic combi boiler, very common in lots of social and private homes across the UK. Although 1 million properties, homes across the UK aren't connected to the gas network. So again, we have those issues that may be in more rural areas, particularly in areas where they're not connected to the gas grid. This can be a particular interest. Top right is then electrification. So again, moving to a decarbonised non-gas based system, things like electric panels, storage heaters, linking into mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, solar panels, utilising the roof space to then power any kind of heat emitter in the property. Bottom left is solar panels, so a nice segue into self-generation. Having that south-facing roof can be really helpful in then having that self-supporting energy source to power whatever system. And again, we have on the bottom right, biomass or biofuel. Again, the appropriateness of planning requirements, the locality, the ability of getting fuel for those properties as well, and thinking about what is the most appropriate level of heating that the property can have. So again, all of these will be dependent on kind of planning rules, planning regulations, planning frameworks that might exist within your particular local area. What's really important is when we are deciding about what type of heating, and this is very general, it's about what is that construction type, what is the fabric, is it wimpy no fines, is it a historical building, is it 10 years old? Thinking about the age and the structure is really important in understanding about how that system might get into that property, and what connections, what transmission factors do we need to be thinking about. Thinking about the occupants themselves, the ability to use the heating system. In the resident engagement sessions that we do, we talk about the occupant and understanding the occupant in terms of their vulnerability, talking about language, talking about permitting access to properties, all really important when we're thinking about heating systems as well, in terms of understanding how that particular person might be able to access and drive their heating system. We're going to be talking about digital connectivity in a couple of months, but again, if we're putting a system in that has an app and that person doesn't have a smartphone that then won't have an app that control that heating system, that's going to lead to significant problems. So really making sure that it is part of that process in designating what heating system. The ability to get a particular fuel as well is really important. So biomass in particular, access to fuel pellets, access to kind of a particular fuel case is really important. Again, that self-sufficiency element comes into play. So thinking about if we're having an electricity-based system, can there be some element of generation at that property to support and drive that heating system? We also have to think about climate change, so decarbonising the heating systems, so moving away from a grid-based system to burning something, utilising fossil fuels. So even with electricity use, a lot of electricity in the UK at the moment is created from gas-powered power stations. So how do we kind of move towards that? This comes back to the philosophy of whole house retrofit, dealing with those issues around different properties that might exist. So when we're thinking about this, really important. This is a nice graph that I like to kind of bring up because it shows how different types of properties actually might need different amounts of heat. So we have along the bottom, we have flat, detached, semi-detached and a terrace. So again, quite common occurrences in portfolios of social housing. You might have whole terraces, there might be a whole estate of semi-detached properties. And again, we can see how this heat demand actually does vary. What we might think about is with more people who are working from home, we might see that this trend is actually slightly different. However, what we do generally see is that before 8 o'clock, we have kind of peaks in that demand. And then kind of after 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, again, we have those peaks that we see in that heating demand. So again, thinking about how that might influence our heating choice and where we might utilise that particular element. So we've got to think about the dwelling in particular. We've got to be focused on what options might exist, but also considering those whole house retrofit options that might have also been installed. So some of the key questions to ask any design team, the retrofit coordinator, retrofit designer, site manager, any contractors that you are involving in your particular process, is actually understanding how much heat is going to be needed. So to do that assessment, you need a suitably qualified person to undertake that assessment to really understand what is going to be the heating need. So again, understanding who is going to be in it, any particular vulnerabilities that they might have, and detailed calculations need to be made to consider a whole range of different factors in that. So construction is important in there. The amount of glazing, the amount of particular doors, the fabric utilised. So is it a off-site construction? Is it a 19th century stone cottage? Whatever it might be, it's understanding the details of that. We also want to be trying to understand estimates of heating costs. Now, with fluctuating energy market, this is slightly more difficult to do. What we need to understand is actually how much is this likely to do and to cost the person who's living there. So understanding how that might look in terms of future markets as well is a helpful exercise. Thinking about fuel poverty. So again, it might be something to link in if you have a particular team in your organisation that are addressing that particular issue. What type of emitter will be suited to the home will again depend on all of these different factors. I've worked on projects where the plan was for air source heat pumps. Actually this didn't work because of the design of the structure, the planning requirements, the restrictions in terms of exposure to neighbouring properties. So they actually went for mechanical ventilation and heat recovery with electric panels. So again, real kind of opportunity to really explore what the bespoke option should be. So when we're thinking about it in terms of simple systems, you will have some sort of kind of existing way of creating heat. In this example, it's a simple boiler. It might be that you have a particular kind of heat pump, for example. There will be some associated kind of piping networks, connectivity around the property. You'll then have the actual emitters itself. So this might be the underfloor heating. It might be radiators that are still appropriate. They might have had need some replacement or upgrades to the valves that are utilised there. Depending on the system that you're utilising, some will need to have a hot water cylinder, some won't. Again, so thinking about different systems that you might consider, and this is all connected into the house, utilising the ability to get the heat going around the property. So we have that generation of the heat, and we have that system which distributes the heat around the home. When we're thinking about it, and these are some common examples, and there are other ones available. This is taken from research and from us working on the SHRA project in terms of what is kind of being installed at the moment. But again, there are lots of specific examples, and I would always look at the options to explore that. So radiators, underfloor heating and skirting board systems as well have been installed as examples. Touching on the controls, which is a really important mechanism to really think about. It's going to be dependent on the system that you have installed. And it's important to understand the range of control that might be needed. So it might be around timers, it might be around an app, it might be a wall-mounted unit. When we're thinking about the efficiency and we're wanting to have an efficient system, we don't want to have something that is just going to be turned on and left on all day, not necessarily heating space which is being occupied. We want to have a system that is going to be utilised by people in that property to keep them warm. the house isn't a human being and doesn't need that. We need to heat the people and keep those people warm, because actually having that level of thermal comfort is known to improve health and well-being. So again, having that warmth is really important. Controlling the ability to get that warmth to the people that need it in that property is part of the control philosophy. So it's making sure that whoever is going to be the tenant in that property, when there has been a heating upgrade, for example, or there has been a change to the control systems themselves, it might be around very simply having controllable TRVs, so thermostatic radiator valves. That might be a very simple project that is taking place, or it might be this whole scale retrofit project. It's really making sure that there is an understanding of how that system is going to work. It's making sure that actually that system is going to perform as designed and to get the maximum out of it. So we're getting that output for the people that need it, when they need it, and where they need it. So again, there will be different types of systems that work in different settings. So a flat will be different from a terrace. A semi-detached property will in a rural location will be different to a city centre location. So again, really thinking about how we can kind of talk through this. So there are lots of different options. We've only got an hour, so we can't go through every particular one. But here are some examples of different heat emitters that we can consider. It is important to note that independent research should be done. Those of you who are Northwest based and wider might be familiar with the Energy House Labs at the University of Salford, who are doing a lot of research on different technology in different homes. They're working with some mainline and house builders on these particular projects as well. So always look at the research, always read into the examples, making sure that contractors are utilising the trust mark as well. So here we have an example of infrared panels, a different way of getting that heat into the room. It's really focusing on getting that heat to the person as well. Again, it will depend on the ability to get contractors in to do it. It will depend on the age and the structure and the tenants that are within that property. But again, it's another example that can be put forward. Air source heat pumps are seeing a lot of deployment at the moment, and again, really successfully undertaken. There is a lot of research in terms of the appropriateness for lots of different properties. Again, make sure you're getting that research. Make sure you're getting a wide variety of quotes and options. You might have seen in the news recently about Octopus launching a particular version of their own heat pump. Again, so look at the different options that might be available to you. You might have some examples that you have already utilised, and think about the different options. There are also ground source heat pumps and air to water heat pumps. Again, depending on your locality, your planning requirements, the construction of the material of the building itself, absolutely can be the right choice for your project. It is important to consider that actually the efficiency of the heat pump, particularly combined with an on-site generation of electricity, can be really significant and see some real efficiency benefits. Thinking about installation, thinking about who's going to do that, making sure we're getting a variety of quotes in terms of being able to do that. Again, we've touched on this in terms of the resident engagement, having those understanding that actually the heat provided by air source heat pumps is a very different heat from, say, a gas boiler system. So it's about maintaining that temperature rather than having those peaks and troughs that quite often we are used to with a boiler-based system. Heat networks are also a really important thing that I think is important to consider. this is much more that holistic approach for widespread estate opportunities for delivering heat to those properties. So it will be a central source, and it will deliver the heat as a service almost to those people within that network. It does avoid the need to have a particular boiler or a heat emitter in each individual home, which sees some benefits. Financially, it can be an interesting one to have a look at, but again, look at the specifics of the cost benefit analysis for that. Again, in certain settings, it can be really useful when combining with other different agencies, different organisations, different businesses that might exist who might have an excess of heat that actually can be utilised by that organisation. So again, I'm sure there's some people on the call today that have found that actually that is something that has been really successful for them. And again, I think the option is to really think about what is going to be the best for my project, for the people that are living in the homes that we are upgrading. What's going to be the best option there? Thinking about who's in those properties, how can they control it? Will they be able to maintain that level of thermal comfort? One thing really wanted to focus on here this afternoon was we've installed it. It's going to be designed appropriately and significantly for that particular property. So we might have a range of new controls, we might have a range of new emitters that have gone in. It might need, in the particular design and from the manufacturer, it might have a particular set of maintenance procedures that need to go through. So again, linking into maintenance teams, maintenance departments, and wherever that might sit. It might be external contractors that are utilising that work, but it's making sure that we are maintaining the systems how it should be in the designed capacity that exists. So compliance is a really big one that we come into. So those of you familiar with kind of gas safety checks, obviously if you're taking gas out of the property, there's no need for that process to take place. However, there will still be some level of maintenance, making sure that is compliant with any particular specific regulations that exist. Particularly if there is an external flue, a chimney, an exhaust, making sure that is kept free of debris. Obviously, some systems won't have that, and therefore that's not a consideration. So again, it needs to be the specific one to the particular property. Making sure that things are being monitored and maintained, being measured. So again, tenant liaison officers can be really useful here in terms of integrating and understanding any particular issue. Thinking about how the whole retrofit project might need that kind of maintenance as well. How are issues reported? Will there be people that can respond to that? So any particular contractors that have been deployed on the project and have installed a particular emitter, how is that going to be engaged? What are the warranties involved? What insurances need to be in place, for example? So again, making sure that handover is there, that people understand how the system works, common kind of problems that might arise as well, and also making sure that any kind of community hubs understand what heat emitters have gone in, so that any particular issues that they might raise will know kind of how to pass those details on, so the right teams are kind of investigating. So as we kind of pull everything together, really thinking that heat demand is absolutely a seasonal thing. UK houses are designed for a heating load. So we've got to think about how we're going to get that heat into that property. Who needs that property to be warm? Are there vulnerable tenants that need to have a particular temperature maintained, particularly during winter hours? Are there children? Are there elderly people? And how is this going to be maintained? Thinking about it in terms of the estate and the portfolio that you hold, most organisations will have a very diverse portfolio, which will reflect in probably a variety of different heat emitters that have been installed, to a range of different kind of comments from those tenants and those occupants. But it will absolutely depend on the different construction type, whether this is high rise, whether this is a long terrace, whether this is a rural, semi-rural, even urban settings. And the age of those properties will have led to different building regulations being deployed in terms of the design. So different U values in the fabric that will have been assigned, different amounts of glazing permitted as well. Changes to things like fire doors. So in more communal settings, thinking about the influence of the construction of that, and understanding as part of a whole house retrofit that all of those things need to be considered when thinking about changing the heating system that is going to be going in. So it absolutely needs to be specific to that particular home. What we need to think about is that the controls around that are really important. So it's not an afterthought to it. We are thinking about it as part of that whole holistic part of the project. We are thinking that actually the controls and the ability to use those controls might vary depending on the tenants who are actually within that particular property. So thinking about language, thinking about ability to operate systems, even down to things like small buttons, thinking about, can actually my tenant utilize those? So again, understanding how controls are going to be really important. Also making sure that when it's not the heating season, that heating can be switched off. And so that's a real important stage to consider. And we touched on that when we did the overheating session a couple of weeks ago. So again, making sure things can be switched off. Thinking about it and linking towards fuel poverty issues, having an efficient system will hopefully lead to lower bills because you're consuming less energy. Linking into that is around the decarbonisation kind of priority, making sure that we are not relying on fossil fuel based systems to make sure our homes are heated well and we have that level of thermal comfort. Making sure that we are moving towards that journey for UK carbon budgets on emissions associated from heating from homes. Thank you very much for listening. Please do get in touch. My email is on there if you'd like to raise any particular queries with me or kind of talk through anything. There is, of course, the info@socialhousingretrofit.org.uk email address, which is kind of looked after throughout the week by our wider team, and they can send those across to anyone who might find more specialist and expert advice and can kind of respond to you. And then there's the website. So lots of podcasts, lots of guides, lots of toolkits. The forthcoming kind of webinars are all listed on there, or you can look through Eventbrite to join those as well.